The year is 2006. November is rapidly approaching and Nintendo fans everywhere are waiting to get their hands on the latest console from the company, the Nintendo Wii. Meanwhile, the video game giant that would go on to be my favorite of the major companies was getting ready for their new release. And on November 19th, 2006, the Wii hit store shelves in North America. Packaged with it and included alongside every copy of the console upon release was a game that would leave a massive impact on the casual gaming scene and Nintendo's image as a whole. This record-breaking, TV-shattering, easily accessible, and addictive first addition to the Wii's library would find a nice cozy spot in the hearts of players around the world. Even I, a small child who wouldn't have a Wii or the game until a few years later, could still feel its impact through my own experiences with family and friends, as well as seeing the game referenced in various forms of popular media.
Well, it looks like it's time to play my second favorite game. Hide the broken TV from Dave. You wanna play?
No.
It benefited from the very simple yet effective concept of playing video game renditions of things that people who actually have lives do. No, but in all seriousness, this game was huge. Not only did it make its way to becoming the best-selling console video game of all time and still ranks 4th in best-selling games overall, but it got media coverage that many other games just didn't. Some sources praise the game and its console's family-friendly accessibility, and others just like to talk about the dangers of the system by sharing countless videos of people launching Wii remotes into their TVs at full force.
Oh, jeez.
And God bless them for that. Wii Sports quickly became a beloved staple of Nintendo's library of games and ended up getting a couple of sequels, with Wii Sports Resort on the same console, which included many new games and the entirety of Woohoo Island to explore. Wii Sports Club was also a thing. Moving on, many people who love the Switch, Nintendo's most recent console and the best-selling home console they've ever produced, would hope for the game to be ported or completely remastered on the modern system. Eventually, Nintendo answered this plea with the announcement of an all-new successor to the legendary title. Now we fast forward all the way to February 9th of 2022. I was seated in the university's Union building with my friend Anthony, eagerly waiting to hear about what news was to come from the month's Nintendo Direct. And many of the things shown were to be expected. Splatoon 3 footage, more of the new Kirby game, and new additions to the Nintendo Switch Online virtual consoles, to name a few. But among these were some unexpected announcements. Ports for the classic Portal games that I love. Portals, if you will. Stretched out paid DLC for a Mario Kart game that came out almost 8 years ago, which honestly warrants its own video, but that's for another time. A new installment to the Mario Strikers series slated to release in May, and most importantly for today's video, Nintendo Switch Sports. I was not prepared for this announcement. I had heard vague ideas of people who wanted Wii Sports on the Switch, which I thought was unlikely yet plausible, but the last thing I was expecting was for Nintendo to go out of their way to make an entirely new game in the series, and I was ecstatic. That said, not everyone was as optimistic as I was. Many people were instantly put off with the way the game looked, and more specifically the characters themselves, who we later learned were called Sportsmates. I mean, Miis were a key part of the original Wii Sports identity, so I completely understand how this change didn't sit right with fans. We were shown, however, from the very first announcement that you are in fact given the option to play as your Miis. Still, this wasn't enough. Countless people were upset that Miis weren't the sole focus when it came to characters. Now what I'm about to say might be a bit of a hot take, and I'm prepared for any backlash that may come from this, but I will die on this hill. I don't think it's bad or at all surprising that Nintendo would choose to steer away from Miis with this release. Look, I understand that Miis were a huge part of Wii Sports, and they were perfect for that game. But it's hard to deny that they've dwindled significantly in relevancy in recent years. The 3DS had some detailed additions involving Miis since it was released while Nintendo was still in its Wii and Wii U era, but the Switch barely even acknowledges them most of the time. You can still make Miis and use them for your profile picture, but there's no equivalent to the Mii channel from the Wii or anything similar. The most use you tend to get out of them in-game is with titles like Miitopia, but even that game has its own Mii creator that's much more detailed than the regular one. Aside from that, they're used rather conservatively. Mii Fighters in Smash and Lobby Dwellers in Mario Kart doesn't exactly scream to me that Nintendo is planning to push Miis much more than they already have. Anyway, controversial Mii talks aside, shortly after the initial teaser we were told there would be a few days in the near future where players would be able to test out some parts of the game before its release. So I marked my calendar and I waited. On February 20th, the last day the playtest was open because I didn't account for time zones correctly on the first 2 days, I got to play for about 45 minutes and get my first feel for this game. For this event's purposes, you were only able to play 3 of the 6 main sports: bowling, tennis, and Chambara. You were also only able to choose random when queuing up to cycle between the 3, so it was a fairly limited demo but still seems to have served its purpose well enough. It was hard to tell whether it was the game servers or my own shoddy Wi-Fi's fault, but I got disconnected randomly at least 3 or 4 times. Luckily, this issue doesn't seem to have carried over much to the final game in my experience. Nintendo was also doing this weird thing during the playtest weekend where they were actively purging the internet of footage that people had taken from the event. Of course, much of it still remained, but it was aggressive enough for people to notice. Not really sure why you would want less people to be exposed to what's basically free advertising for your upcoming title, but Nintendo will be Nintendo. Despite the few connection issues, I had a great time during the playtest. I was home for the weekend, so my friend Adam just got to sit on the couch behind me and watch me lose my mind over it. I enjoyed the bowling section even though I wasn't able to do the thing that everyone loves in Wii Sports. Tennis was probably my favorite of the 3 simply because it was already my favorite on the Wii and was translated over fairly well. And Chambara was the least familiar to me since I played much more Wii Sports back in the day than Wii Sports Resort, but it was still pretty fun and had new interesting mechanics nonetheless. Overall, the playtest was a positive experience for me and most of the people I saw who participated, with some promising additions that left me excited to play the rest of the sports and design my own little character. 2 more months and 1 paycheck later, I finally got my hands on what's personally been the most anticipated game of my new year. Well, I didn't literally get my hands on the game because I bought the digital version on the eShop for $40. I wanted to get the physical version, but it comes with the leg strap accessory for soccer, which means that it's $50 instead.
$50?
$60 plus tax.
$50. Incredible. $50. Wow.
And I didn't want to pay that extra $10. I mean, I'm sure this thing is some fun to mess with for a few rounds, but I can guarantee you that Nintendo produced these things for less than $1 each, so raising the price of the game by $10 for including it is a little not worth it if you ask me. Besides, I'm a college student with a part-time job that pays $8.50 an hour. $10 is a lot of money to me. I have to buy food and uphold the lease that I signed for an apartment with 3 other people. I'm not just gonna throw away an extra $10 for an awkward accessory with a Velcro strap just to forget about it 2 days later. So I said goodbye to 2 of the gigabytes on my Switch's built-in system memory, downloaded the digital copy, and pressed play. From the startup screen, we already get a good idea of how this game is gonna look. It brings over some of the simplicity from the menus of Wii Sports with the expected white and blue traits, but adds a lot in order to make them stand out. The off-white shapes representing the sports in the background, including the rounded lines and dots, give the menus you navigate a sleek feel without detracting too much from the original Wii Sports style, I think. When you get into actually playing the sports though, things get a lot more colorful. There's plenty to look at, both within the sport you're playing and outside of the player area, where you can constantly see other NPC characters walking around and going about their lives in the environment. I initially wasn't quite sure how to feel about the modern urban look of Spotco Square. It's a big change from the tropical aesthetics of Woohoo Island, but it grew on me as I continued playing. The shops and different public spaces you can see outside of the bubble you're playing in really add a sense of depth to the world that previously just kind of felt like a gentrified mall with a hotel attached. It's the type of stuff that makes me want to explore outside of the boundaries of the sports themselves and actually participate in the world, but I'll get more into that later, trust me. All the different sports have their own unique area with a specific feel for each of them. Volleyball has a sunny sort of greenhouse feel with a court inside of it reminiscent of a trip to the Y. Badminton offers an eerily sleek futuristic court that looks like it's surrounded by an airport from the year 3022. Bowling adds some more shine and background activity to the liminal space that we had back in the days of Wii Bowling. Soccer is a warm green field where all of the contestants are apparently forced to dye their hair pink or blue depending on what team they're on. Oh, and there are some palm trees in the background that kind of remind me of Wii Sports Resort. Chambara has a super cool arena that's surrounded by water and what seems to be a library with a reading area. And tennis has an open, rounded shaped court, decked out with little water installations on the edges and a surprisingly tame audience. That seems to be a common theme with a lot of these environments. The characters off to the sidelines that watch are just kind of chilling. They're doing their own thing instead of being actively invested in what's happening, which I actually kind of like. Some of them aren't even watching at all. They just happen to be nearby while they're getting ice cream or reading or something. But let's take a look at the characters themselves. After all, they were what many people had an issue with when the game was first announced. So how did they hold up? One of the first things Nintendo Switch Sports prompts you to do is customize your character, which can be a Mii that you've already made or a custom sports-made avatar unique to the game itself. I opted to go with the latter and was pretty happy with the cute character I ended up making, but I do wish the options for the initial base features had a little more variety. The amount of hairstyle choices and features like freckles and blush feel very limited. It reminds me of the very few default customization options you get when making a new villager in Animal Crossing. Luckily for me, these basic options included hair that looks similar enough to my actual hair for me to like it, but I'm just afraid I can't say the same for many players. You can earn more hairstyles and eye colors through collections while playing online, but if you ask me, long curly hair and hazel eyes shouldn't be locked behind an award. Maybe crazy uncommon hairstyles or unnatural eye colors, sure, but I think that some of the features in the collection should have just been given to the player at the start because guess what? Not every human in the world has one of 6 specific hairstyles. Shocker, I know, I was surprised to learn that too. Aside from that, you also start off with 8 outfit options all with different colors, 4 of which have longer coats and sporty leggings while the other 4 have shorter hoodies and shorts. I went for the one with the brown hoodie until I eventually earned this outfit, and now that's all I wear in the game because it's just so damn cute. You earn new items for your characters like this by simply playing online. After each game, you'll earn points until you fill up this bar and are given the option to roll the dice for an item in your preferred collection. On launch day, this meant only the Simple Collection and the Cute Collection, both of which I think are good picks to start out with. By doing this enough times and unlocking all of your initial slots, you'll be rewarded with the 2 main outfits from the collection. I love this one from the Simple Collection, and also this one from the Cute Collection. The others are alright, I guess. Moving on from clothing, you can also earn titles, stamps, and equipment from these collections. Titles are 2-part statements that you can mix and match to describe yourself or just make something funny or self-deprecating like me, and they simply spice up your name tag a little bit. Stamps are little stickers that you can use during games to express yourself, similar to the ones in Mario Party Superstars, but let's be honest, it's more fun to just spam the crying stamps instead. And equipment basically functions as cosmetic skins for the different things you use to play the sports, like the cute sword or the purple tennis racket, just to name a couple. I love this edition, and it's something that I've wanted for a while. In the original Wii Sports, there was a little trick where you could choose one of 4 bowling ball colors, but outside of that, you didn't really have much say in what your equipment looked like. So I'm really glad they decided to run with that idea in Switch Sports. Now enough about how the game looks. Let's talk about how it actually feels to play. I was admittedly a little worried when going into this that the feeling of interacting with the sports game through motion controls wouldn't translate very well from the Wii Remote to the Joy-Con controller, but I'm happy to say that I was dead wrong. There aren't very many Switch games that I use motion controls with. Even in Splatoon, where it's socially acceptable to use motion controls to help with accuracy, I usually just don't, even though it means I can barely hit anything in that game. But with this title, I knew it would be a requirement rather than an option. And luckily it turned out pretty good. I do have some minor gripes with certain control changes, like how you're supposed to continue holding the shoulder button when bowling instead of letting go to release like you did in Wii Sports. It's a bit of an adjustment at first, but that goes for many of the sports here. Switch Sports also has a much larger focus on online play than previous titles, aside from maybe Wii Sports Club. In the first game, online play wasn't even an option, so if you didn't have anyone to play with in the same room, then you were just stuck with bots. But obviously bot Miis like Matt have gotten a surprising amount of love from fans over the years. As much as I love Wii Sports, it can definitely feel pretty lonely when you don't have anyone to join you in the same place. So I like how online play became a core component to this new installment. The only downside is that you need to have a Nintendo Switch Online subscription to participate in a majority of the game. But if you watched my previous 2.5-minute video on online services, then you probably already know how I feel about that, so I'll spare you the rant. By playing enough of one sport, you'll eventually go pro in that sport, and there's a whole rank system for you to compete with other players of a similar skill level. To stay consistent and have a clear direction for this video, I'll briefly talk about each of the 6 available sports that you can currently play, starting with what I consider to be my personal least favorite of the collection and working our way up to the one I enjoy the most. Friendly reminder that this order is purely based on my opinion and not much else at all, but if you have similar or entirely different thoughts on the order you would put these in, then feel free to share it with me. For mine, we start at the bottom with badminton. First off, I don't hate this one, it's just not really for me. I thought that I would like it more considering how much I love tennis and Wii Sports and during the playtest, but the gameplay is just varied enough for the 2 sports to feel very different compared to each other. I just don't prefer the one-on-one structure and smaller court. The games feel more fast-paced, but to the point where it can get painfully repetitive rather quickly. Oh yeah, and when you dive too far forward to return a hit, sometimes your character just decides to fall down and lay there long enough for you to lose a point with the next one. It's a bit harsh of a penalty and practically guarantees that you'll get scored on, but I don't know, maybe I just suck at badminton. It could be me, but swinging the racket itself doesn't feel as impactful as I'd like. Even when you land a strong spike, the sounds and motions that come with it don't quite land the way I was hoping they would. It just sort of feels underwhelming. Now that I've voiced my distaste for badminton, time for the next sport. Chambara. I realize now that earlier in the video I was pronouncing this Chambara, which is just not right. What can I say, I'm a stupid American. I had absolutely no idea what Chambara was before this game existed. To my new enlightened understanding, it's simply a Japanese word meaning sword fighting. Which I mean, yep, that tracks. Anyway, this one's pretty interesting. It's a lot like swordplay from Wii Sports Resort, but it adds 2 new types of sword options. There's the standard sword, the charged sword, and twin swords. The standard has the strongest regular hits considering that it doesn't have any other special abilities aside from guarding. Charged sword lets you release a more powerful special hit after you've guarded enough, and twin swords kinda do the same thing except there's 2 of them and it looks cooler. If you couldn't tell, I'm partial to the twin swords, but I also play my fair share of the old reliable standard. The arena, like I mentioned earlier in the presentation section, just has a really neat atmosphere to it. It's easily my favorite environment of all 6 sports. It's just so nice and well designed. Overall, this sport is pretty fun. It doesn't leave a bad taste in my mouth the way badminton does. It's just as far down on the list because I really enjoy the other 4 sports. If you like swordplay and resort, then you'll probably love this one for similar reasons. The intensity is very much there, and tides are still decided by a smaller one-hit platform. I have a great time with this one. Not much else to say. I was debating which order I was going to talk about Chambara with the next sport, and my opinion could certainly change down the line, but I'll stick with this for now. Next up we have soccer, or football if you're not from the US. Regular matches have 4 people on each team, all kicking a giant ball towards giant goals. It very much gives Rocket League, only if Rocket League had less cards and more diving headers. For obvious reasons, this sport feels the biggest out of all of them. Even the Battle Royale style online bowling doesn't quite match the huge field and the freedom to run around. That's right, this is the only sport of the 6 where you can have full control of your character's movement. You can sprint by holding the left shoulder button while using up some stamina, and press A to wave and say here to your teammates. My roommate and I just think it's really funny to wave constantly. I mean, if Nintendo gives me this feature, then I'm gonna abuse it. You can kick in all different directions and use even more of your stamina for those diving headers I mentioned before. It's kind of hard to get the direction right sometimes, but overall it's fairly intuitive and feels entertaining anyway. Soccer might not have the smash hit sounds that something like Chambara or tennis would, but it makes up for it with a massive stadium and personality for days. Not to mention that when one team is up 2 points, oftentimes a golden ball will show up and counts for twice as much to keep the games interesting and competitive. As a washed up fan of Rocket League, I highly recommend. Oh, bowling. What is there to say about bowling that hasn't already been said? It's easily a fan favorite for past Wii Sports players and new Switch owners alike. This time around, since Switch Sports has a strong online focus, they figured out a way to adapt it accordingly. You're thrown into a game with 16 total players, and a few of the people at the bottom of the leaderboard each round get eliminated until eventually it ends up with the top 3 contestants. It's an interesting way to broaden the scope of a previously straightforward game, and sometimes higher ranked games will even include obstacles and inclines to make things more challenging. The fact that you play with 15 other people at a time does unfortunately come with some brief waiting times between rounds, but I'm not personally too bothered by it. I tend to multitask a lot anyway, so I'm usually still entertained by something I've got going in the background while I wait. Curves rarely ever seem to go the way that I want them to, but I think that's more just me being bad than the game's fault. Bowling was the first of these that I went pro in, and it's refreshing to take on a classic Wii Sports activity. I really enjoyed the way it built on the previously established sport, almost as much as I enjoyed this next sport we're going to talk about. I mentioned my love for the original Wii Sports rendition of tennis earlier in this video, so this should come as absolutely no surprise. This sport is just so satisfying and fun to play. The feel of the motion controls and the accompanying sounds of rackets hitting the tennis ball takes me all the way back to my childhood. I must say, the developers did an outstanding job at transferring the basic yet engaging gameplay of the Wii counterpart and molding it to fit this title. Even power servers make a return and leave behind a bright streak that reinforces how strong the hit was. I recently revisited Wii Sports Tennis to see how long it would take me to hit pro on a friend's console. Shout out Anthony. And it was challenging, but definitely left me wanting to do more. Switch Sports delivers on that idea with the rank system so that I always have something to work towards or maintain in my favorite game. Whenever these initial 6 sports were revealed, I was a bit concerned that badminton, tennis, and volleyball would all feel too similar with the basic net setup that they share, but I'm happy to say that that's not the case. Tennis feels a tiny bit slower than badminton, but undoubtedly makes for more impactful hits and the most lovely sounds. Music to my ears. I know that I just finished gushing about tennis, but volleyball in this game surprised me and ended up being another favorite of mine. It is somewhat similar to tennis in the way that the ball being in and out of bounds goes, but that's honestly the only real similarity. This one requires good teamwork, which can be hit or miss online, but it's also simple enough for most people to be decent at it. You can spike the ball normally or jump extra early for a quick spike. I haven't really mastered this yet, but I'm working on it. Blocking up front allows you to move side to side before you jump and forces you to predict which direction your opponent is going to spike the ball. This means you need to make sure your side of the court is covered and ready to return. It does a good job of mixing up the gameplay and keeping things fun, and spiking the ball somehow feels even stronger than it looks. If it weren't for the fact that you could coordinate a team with 2 players in the same room, then this honestly would be below tennis on my list, because it's the most fun I've had with a multiplayer feature in a while. My roommate and I shouting vague phrases like "get it" at each other each time the ball came back to our side of the court made for some really good laughs, and caused the sport to feel extra special to me. While it does have its flaws, the gameplay in Switch Sports feels crisp and refreshing. It manages to take the building blocks of the Wii Sports series and make something more concise but dense enough to keep players engaged. I can only hope that the game improves further as new content is added. With golf on the horizon this fall, I'd love to see more sports like boxing or basketball make their way into future updates. Before we end this journey, I'd like to touch on a couple of smaller things to send us home and speculate on what's to come. I wasn't expecting much from the soundtrack with Nintendo Switch Sports, but I was pleasantly surprised with each new song that I heard. They certainly have their own life, but also occasionally pay homage to their origins and style and little motifs reminiscent of Wii Sports. It feels energetic in a way that's very fitting for the game, and it stays upbeat throughout your entire experience. This is probably just wishful thinking, but it would be really cool if there were eventually seasonal versions of some songs, like a winter theme with bells or a playfully spooky rendition of the music around Halloween. Maybe I've just been spoiled in the past with similar features back during my high school Overwatch days, but little acknowledgements of real-world time is always a neat thing to see. As for other potential features, it seems like the game itself already gives direct hints as to what might come in future updates, or at least I hope it means that. Out of my first week playing Switch Sports, I have seen and documented 9, count 'em 9, different examples of loading screen tips that directly reference places or entities outside of the regular sports restrictions. They talk about an art gallery, hotels, a locker room area, clothing stores, a juice bar, ice cream shops. All of this fun extra stuff that is just not available in the game itself. You can see some of the Spacco Square businesses in the backgrounds of various sporting areas, but you can't interact or explore them at all. As someone who genuinely wants to see more from this environment, this restriction is infuriating. Ice Cream Volley's second location is in this area. Do you know where the first one is? Like, no dog. I've never even been to the second one that you just assume I already know about. Let me look around and maybe I'll be able to tell you where the first one is. I just can't wrap my head around why they would include these direct references in the tips like this if there's absolutely no way to do anything with them. The optimistic part of me hopes that it's hinting at adding more non-sports features at some point in the future updates, but I guess only time will tell. This could just be something that developers put in for fun world building and didn't really consider having outside exploration. But I keep seeing these screens so many times that I just had to mention it. I hope that the game keeps growing over the next year or two with more unlockable items, sports, and maybe even a way to see more of Spacco Square. Not trying to get my hopes up, but I've thoroughly enjoyed this game so far, and I can't wait to see what the future holds for it. Well folks, we made it to the end of the road. I know that this video has been a lot of me eagerly babbling into the void, but I hope that some of you enjoyed it anyway and maybe consider trying out Nintendo Switch Sports for yourself. It's a good time and I'd love having more people to play with. Hit me up and I'll send you my friend code. I live at 175. I doubt that this game would ever come close to matching the impact or incredible success of Wii Sports, but I don't really think it needs to. It's a fun sort of homage to something that many of us grew up on and doesn't really try to be anything that it isn't. I enjoy the direction that was taken with this new installment of the series, and I look forward to seeing what the development team has planned in the future. For now, I'll keep on playing and check out golf when that gets added later this year. Who knows, I might even make an update video on it. It's been so much fun to work on this video even in the midst of a hectic time for finals, and I'd love to make more video game related content later on. Analog Horror Volume 2 is going to take quite a while, but I'm hoping to get it out sometime later this summer. And I'll be occasionally working on smaller fun projects like this in the meantime. Hopefully that's something you can look forward to as much as I am. And with that, I'll see you all in the next one. Like, subscribe, leave a comment if you've got something to say, all that good stuff. But most of all, from the bottom of my heart, thanks for watching.
When I saw the break of day, I wished that I could fly away instead of kneeling in the sand, catching tears.